Hello, I'm Ari. We've completed a wonderful celebration in Israel and have entered the new year 5786. And we say Shana Dova Umetuka, a good and sweet year. Let's go straight to the latest news from Israel and the region. We begin in Gaza, where a terrorist cell was detected while trying to plant explosives against Israeli soldiers in Gaza City. After being tracked by drones, it was targeted by the Air Force and eliminated. This is part of the Israel Defense Forces says strategy to give no respite to the terrorist group acting before they can attack. The army also released aerial footage showing how terrorists were firing from Shifa Hospital. Once again, Hamas uses a fully functioning hospital as a base of operations. This not only violates all the rules of war but also puts patients, doctors, and the staff working there at risk. Ultimately, Hamas uses all civilian areas as human shields, unfortunately. Meanwhile, the ground offensive continues along with the bombings. The Ministry of Health, controlled by Hamas, reports 38 dead and 90 injured in the last 24 hours. But this war is also measured in displaced people. There are already about 700,000 Gazans who have left the city for the south, leaving approximately 300,000 who still remain in Gaza City. And many of them refuse to leave because they are more loyal to the Hamas faction, while others are not allowed to leave by Hamas because in the end, they are used as human shields. It's a guarantee that Hamas has, so that the Israeli troops can advance as planned, or at least to hinder their path. A Gazan woman said that she doesn't want to move south because the situation there is chaotic and she's afraid that terrorists might be hiding among the displaced people. In other words, they themselves are afraid that they could be harmed by the terrorists. Her wish is to reach Jericho in Judea, what is known as the West Bank, where her family lives. And this detail reminds us that ordinary people are caught between crossfire and political calculations. Israeli armored vehicles are already moving in key neighborhoods like the Awa Hotel and the Shati refugee camp, even around the Shifa Hospital. There were also reports of tanks near a former Red Crescent headquarters and in front of the Fordano Hospital. And at the same time, Israel continues to send thousands of text messages, make phone calls, and drop leaflets from the air asking the civilian population to evacuate. And do their leaflets contain the exact instructions? But even so, many don't do it out of fear, disbelief, or simply because they're never allowed to. The reality is that as a conventional army, it no longer exists. The structure of government, the ministries, and even its social apparatus have collapsed. In the Strip, what remains is an irregular resistance that still seeks to inflict harm. But the fall of Gaza City would have enormous symbolic value in this war. It would be the image of victory that Israel has been pursuing since October 7, 2023. However, although Hamas leaders abroad remain safe after Israel's failed attempt to eliminate them, as long as they are alive, the conflict will not end. It's the same pattern we saw with Islamic State of Iraq and Syria in Syria, with Hezbollah in Lebanon. They don't surrender but wait for their chance to resurge. There's an even more painful point. Civilian suffering doesn't affect Hamas or its leaders at all. Ahmed Yassin, one of the main leaders of the terrorist group, said it clearly. We love death more than life. And with this mentality, every lost life becomes a tool for their narrative of jihad of the Islamic Revolution. In parallel to the fighting, a proposal emerges from the United States to try to resolve this conflict. President Donald Trump presented a plan that includes a 20-day ceasefire and then the return of some of the 48 hostages still held by Hamas, understanding that about half of them are still alive. The plan proposes the creation of a temporary Arab administration in Gaza made up of Muslim nations and with the condition of leaving Hamas completely out. This plan was just discussed in New York within the framework of the United Nations General Assembly. Trump met with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, and Pakistan. According to Emirati media, there was consensus on two key points in that meeting: releasing all the hostages and addressing the humanitarian crisis affecting Hamas. Trump even promised that, under his proposal, he would not allow Israel to annex Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. A gesture intended, from Washington's political standpoint, to reassure Arab leaders and also the Palestinian Authority. But the big question is whether this can succeed. Temporary ceasefires have proven to be very fragile in the end. And the idea of a Palestinian government without Hamas infiltration sounds more like a wish than an immediate reality. And at the same time, Arab countries see here an opportunity to take control of Gaza and reduce regional tension. Something that could, in the end, benefit everyone, except, of course, Hamas. From this perspective, honestly, it would be very difficult for them to agree to this proposal. Ultimately, the proposal is on the table, but the final decision will depend on whether Israel and Hamas are willing to move in that direction. Alright, and now let's go to the south of the country, here in Israel, specifically in Eilat, where a serious incident was reported today. A drone launched from Yemen managed to get through the defenses and exploded near the Mall Hayam shopping center, right in the busiest tourist area of the city. The result? About 20 people injured, 5 of them by shrapnel. 2 people are in serious condition, while others were treated for anxiety and minor injuries. Everyone was hospitalized, and admitted was nearly overwhelmed afterward. What is most concerning is what happened with the Iron Dome, because it simply failed. The army confirmed that they tried to intercept the drone, but they didn't succeed. According to their explanation, the drone was flying so low that it basically behaved like a cruise missile, obviously escaping the Iron Dome. Based on this premise, it wouldn't be considered a failure because it's not designed to attack this type of device, especially when flying at such a low altitude. There's also the issue of a plane that was passing by at that exact moment, and well, in the end, these delays slowed detection. The Air Force has launched an investigation because, well, of course, Eilat isn't just any place. It's the southern border of Israel, a tourist center and also a strategic point. And, well, the truth is that it's become the focus of attacks by the Houthis from Yemen. The clear message is that the Houthis are still taking action aligned with Iran and with the capability to reach here from more than 1,500 kilometers away. So, what if multiple drones operated at once instead of just one? The Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, among other things, said that apparently the Houthis have not learned from what happened with Iran, from what happened with Hamas, from what happened with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so they will have to be made to understand by force. And emphasizing what he always says, that any attack on Israel will be answered 7 times more intensely. The war is no longer just in Gaza or the north, with Hezbollah, it's now regional. Eilat was reminded of it today in the worst way. In precisely during a very festive time when a lot of people are moving around and gathering for family events and more in different parts of Israel. Alright, now we move to New York, where the United Nations General Assembly is taking place, which has become a new front, but this time on the diplomatic stage. There, all this momentum has been driven by France and Saudi Arabia, which resulted in 9 more countries recognizing the state of Palestine. With this, there are now 153 nations that have joined in this recognition. It should be emphasized and clarified that this does not mean that tomorrow or next month a state will be given or handed over to Palestine. So this is purely symbolic. And what remains on the table is that Israel is becoming increasingly isolated on the international stage. What was most surprising was that it wasn't just Arab or non-aligned countries. As in the past, this time it was Western democracies like, well, what we already knew. France, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Spain, that led this whole movement and all this momentum against Israel. And for Israel, this shift is a heavy blow because it shows that even its historical allies are starting to distance themselves. The images of Macron receiving applause alongside the Palestinian envoy were a diplomatic humiliation for Jerusalem, especially because Israel did not present a clear alternative for the future of the region. Germany, Italy, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Argentina abstained from the recognition. But the atmosphere, well, seems to be increasingly turning against Israel. France is even talking about a second wave of recognitions, and this time coming from Asia. Among the reactions, King Felipe of Spain used his speech to demand that Israel stop what he called the abhorrent massacre in Gaza. And from Colombia, unfortunately, President Petro went even further. He urged the United Nations to create an international coalition. I heard correctly, willing to send armies to Israel. Saying that words are no longer needed, but that it's time to choose between freedom or death. It's very unfortunate and shameful for Colombians what's happening with the leader of this country. Beautiful country. Netanyahu's response was forceful to this whole situation. There will not be a Palestinian state. Recognizing it after the massacre of October 7 is rewarding terrorism with a huge gift. The Prime Minister also says he will address the situation after returning from the United States. The feeling is that almost 2 years after the Hamas attack, Israel went from being seen as the victim to being portrayed as the aggressor in much of the world, and that changes the diplomatic landscape in a way that can have very serious consequences in the medium, even in the short term. While all this is happening on the diplomatic front, Iran is wasting no time and is working at full speed to restore its military capability. Recent satellite images show that Tehran is rebuilding two key missile production facilities in Parshin and Sharut. Both facilities were heavily damaged during the 12-day war against Israel last June. Experts analyzing the images note that a crucial component is still missing. The large mixers, known as planetary mixers, are machines necessary to manufacture high-quality solid fuel. Without them, the missiles don't reach the level of precision and power that Iran is seeking. And with all this, what we see is that Israel keeps a close eye on Iran. It maintains constant surveillance every day. And even so, the regime's priority is clear. They know that another war with Israel is not a distant scenario, but a real possibility, and almost in the short term. And in that context, missiles have become one of the few deterrent elements they have left after seeing many of their air defense systems degraded. That's why, from Tehran, they insist that this issue will never be on the negotiating table with the West. The lesson is simple. While Israel and its allies discuss in diplomatic forums, Iran quietly moves forward to ensure that when the time comes, they can strike Israel hard again. And in the midst of all this, the so-called Freedom Flotilla appears again, approaching. Now, it's really close to the shores of Gaza. Israel offered for the aid to be unloaded very close to the port of Ashkelon, serving as a bridge since the Israeli Navy. This is to be able to transfer the precious cargo that is supposed to arrive in a safe and supervised manner. Then, to transfer it to those interested in this whole matter, who are the Gazans, and to do it, obviously, by land. But the organizers rejected the proposal. They prefer to continue and try to enter directly into the war zone, into the forbidden area, violating the naval blockade, which is completely legal according to international law. And that's the key to all of this. If they truly wanted to help civilians, they would have chosen the peaceful option. They deliver the aid as intended. And that's it. By refusing, they prove their priority isn't humanitarian aid, but making a media spectacle that benefits Hamas again. Furthermore, the connection between this flotilla and Hamas is impossible to ignore with all the information that is starting to leak out. Their supposed flotilla leader, Ser Birawi, a person who, according to the information that has come out and been revealed in recent days, is linked to the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe and has been photographed repeatedly with Ismail Haniyeh, one of the most prominent. That connection is obvious and visible to all. And it makes it clear that behind the operation there is a political and military objective, rather than a genuine interest in the civilian population. They really don't care. The question is, what will happen when this flotilla encounters the Israeli Navy? Because it's inevitable that this will happen. If they decide to challenge, obviously the blockade, the confrontation could be immediate, and the message being conveyed is very clear. This is not about activism, it's about legitimizing a terrorist organization. Israel has already announced that this time the activists will be prosecuted in Israel, which would indicate that they will not be deported to their countries. The question we need to ask ourselves is whether Israel will be able to hold its ground on all these fronts at once: military, diplomatic, and propaganda. Because in this war, not everything is fought with weapons, but also with narratives, and sometimes those narratives hit much harder than the missiles themselves. Before we finish, I invite you, if you haven't done so yet, to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and remember that we have channel memberships that give you access to the private news group on WhatsApp, where we post every day. Don't leave without giving us a like. See you.